Hey, assalamu alaikum everyone. So the other day I was going for a walk and I passed by a tree in which there were many birds residing in that tree and they were having a proper conversation within themselves. It sounded like a debate, which inspired me to talk about birds, bird language, the significance of bird language, the value of bird language for psychological reasons, for linguistic reasons, and even the value of bird language in religion, in philosophy, and in mythology. For example, in the Quran, God says that Prophet Solomon, who is the son of Prophet Dawood or David, peace and blessings be upon them, were actually taught specifically the language of the bird. This is also mentioned in biblical verses. We learn that Prophet Solomon, peace and blessings be upon him, was a prophet that conversed with birds, and he was also highly praised for his wisdom. In the book, The Legend of the Jews, the author talks about Prophet Solomon, peace and blessings be upon him's wisdom, and explains that it is actually related to the fact that he was able to converse and understand birds. Obviously, bird language is not the only animal language which is discussed in Abrahamic religions, although Abrahamic religions do emphasize that bird language is a source of wisdom. It's not spoken about too much in Islamic literature, but it's spoken about a lot in Jewish literature, a bit less in Christian literature. What I found most interesting is that bird language specifically, unlike other animal languages, is also discussed in Greek mythology. It is discussed in Norse mythology. It is discussed in folklore. A lot of philosophers talk about bird language. For example, in Norse mythology, they have the legend of Dag the Wise, which is supposedly a king who was so wise, he was able to communicate with birds, and he would have birds which would go to other lands, like faraway lands, collect information and give him that information. So he was a king who was passionate about bird language. And also, when one of his ravens apparently was killed, he went to avenge that raven. Another example, which is found in Norse mythology, but is also found in Greek mythology, is the tale of All-Father Odin. I feel more comfortable calling him Odin, but essentially it's apparently the story of a ruler, a deity, apparently the wisest man who ever lived and who ruled. And apparently in his story, he had two birds that followed him around, and these birds would collect information and give it to him in bird language. European alchemists actually believed that bird language was the secret to perfect knowledge, perfect information, and they also called it la langue verte, or the green language. The research on bird language is quite interesting. For example, scientists have recorded birds communicating within themselves, and they tried to do some research to find if there is any variations in their language. Would we be able to find any variations in their language? And they found, and this is real, that bird songs have variations in pitch, frequency, rhythm, inflections, modulation, range, and even perhaps terminology. It is hypothesized that bird language is so complex that it almost matches the complexity found in human language. So just to clarify, this is still very controversial. A lot of scientists call this bird singing, bird sounds, bird calls. Very few researchers actually call it bird language. And that is because some people assume there's not much of a difference between the sounds a bird makes and a typical mating call or a typical call for help. But birds, unlike other animals, they sing throughout the day. They're quite consistent, and it would seem that they're conversing within themselves rather than just calling another bird to mate or calling another bird for help. Like, for example, there is a consistent time between every time a bird chirps. It tends to chirp consistently with a consistent time gap between each chirp, almost like there is a pause in the word or a pause in the sentence. A few fun facts. Compositional syntax, which is a feature that was previously assumed to be unique to human language, has actually been found in the song of the Japanese tit, which is a type of bird, obviously. And another thing is that birds actually learn their songs, just like humans have to learn language. They're not born with the same song patterns as adult birds. Anyways, there is a lot more that can be said about bird language. Like, for example, listening to birds has a healing effect on the body. It is also worth noting that there's this very interesting website called birdlanguage.com. Apparently, it hasn't been updated in a long time, but it's a community of people who try to learn bird language collectively. I don't know about that. I don't think that humans have definitely cracked the intricacies and the complexities of bird language, but because I'm Muslim, obviously, I do believe that there is a bird language. And I do think that the language of birds is a language of wisdom.